Okay, we are live. Yay!
Yay!
Welcome, everybody, to Tuesday Tips to Unleash Your Amazing. Today's special guest is Jamie. Jamie is an amazing lady, and we actually used to live in the same neighborhood. But actually, what brought us together was trauma. And we were talking beforehand and before all the technical glitches about how interesting it is that how many people that we've met new in our lives because of our losses. And yeah, so Jamie, would you introduce yourself and say hello to our Facebook guests?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Tammy. I'm Jamie Wehmeyer, and I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I provide training, consultation, coaching, presentations on trauma and resilience, and how important it is for us to take good care of each other so that we can be resilient and I guess have amazing things happen.
Yeah. And let's see. She said that one of the things that she likes the most about what she does is helping others to understand that we all have a story, and treating each other kindly can make a difference. And I think that that's a really important point, that there's so much trauma going on in the world, and that's even pre-COVID. Right. And right now, even more so, people's emotions are really heightened right now. And I think that kindness definitely matters. And I think that was actually one of your points today.
Absolutely. One of the definite things that I think about is, certainly in the last 7 months with all that's been happening around COVID-19 and social justice issues and just the political climate that we are living in right now, that I haven't seen a lot of kindness in place, and I think that unfortunately, what's happened is that there's been so much negative energy around everything that's happening that it's impacting people on a really personal level. And so, one of the things that I've really talked about long before the last 7 months is just how we treat people matters. And so, and I certainly know for myself that when I'm really struggling with my trauma story and my loss, that when I practice intentional acts of kindness, it helps me. It helps me through a bad day. If I go out and find something nice to do for someone, or those things find me sometimes whenever I'm in those spaces where I just do something simple, like, buying a bottle of water for someone, to just make a simple act of kindness matter, and not just for myself, because it does help me to feel good, but also I'm building someone else's resilience by demonstrating kindness as well. So, and I love that part.
Yeah. Jamie, would you share a little bit about your story and what you are a trauma survivor of?
Absolutely. So, I guess my story starts with my education and what I've been doing for the last, almost 30 years now in my life. As a social worker, I started working in the field of actually working with women who were substance users and their children. They could bring their kids into treatment with them, and I always say I started that as a baby, and actually I went to 4 years of school and didn't learn anything to prepare me for what I was going to be doing, because I quickly learned, working with these women who lived in the urban core, who were really struggling to find themselves, that I would say 100% of them had a trauma story, a story that they brought in with them that was highly connected to their substance use. And so I really, from the beginning of my career, started studying trauma and trying to understand how, at that time, how clinically I could help people recover and heal from the traumas that they had experienced. And so, so from working on the substance use side, I switched over and started working on the mental health side, and same story. I was kind of curious. I didn't know what I would find, but same story. Folks who have mental health issues tend to also have a trauma story that follows them. So so I was doing that, and I was while I was there, I started there's this language around trauma-informed practices that started coming into being, and in my field, particularly in the behavioral health field, but really across the country in schools and in hospitals. And as I started reading about that, I loved it. I loved that it wasn't about clinical practices. It was about how we take care of people, and not just how we take care of our clients or our patients, but how we take care of ourselves, how we take care of our coworkers. And it was the idea that everyone has a story, and we need to be consciously doing everything we can to not traumatize folks from their experiences. And so, so I was really at the organization I was working at then, I was the lead at really integrating that that idea into the culture of that organization. When well, 3 years ago now, my 3 years ago in June, my 17-year-old son, Jake, was murdered by one of his friends in an, well, I can't say in a terribly traumatic situation. That sentence sums it all up. My son was murdered. And he was murdered by a young man who he had been friends with since kindergarten. And so we knew very well. And so losing Jake obviously profoundly impacted my life and my family's life. And also the lives of so many people around us that we knew, the kids that were Jake's friends, my family, my extended family, but my neighborhood, as you know, Tammy, my neighborhood. I mean, the school that the boys went to, and it's always a weird thing. I tell folks, as somebody who's really studied trauma for so many years. It's like sometimes I'm hovering over my life watching these systems not take good care of my family. And it became my mission to teach people how to take good care of not just my family, but your family, Tammy, but so many families who come with a story when we enter into to systems that don't know how to take care of us. I don't think anyone intentionally sets out to do harm, but I think that once, I mean, as the saying goes, as Maya Angelou would say, once you know better, you do better. And that's what I hope, is that people will know better and do better.
Yeah, there is so much power in validation of somebody's story, yeah. And being able to stay in your own body, but also like hold space for them, and not, because there's no fixing things. You can't fix something for somebody else, but you can come at it with compassion. And you know, I experienced that with our loss and my kids in the school district, and how much like when it first happened, when David first died, Dakota got a tremendous amount of support. Well, thankfully, because Becky Starnes was at Shoal Creek and just really was such an amazing counselor. But as Hunter was moving up through school, she didn't get the same kind of support, because you don't think about it still being an ongoing thing that, you know, a child loses their parent, but she still grieves and openly grieves, right, and still needs support within our school districts. You know, and whenever I reached out, and like, I am a little bit on a tangent here, but when I reached out about that, you know, the counselor didn't really have the tools. The new counselor didn't really have the tools in her toolbox. And that was really hard for Hunter at the time. I mean, it's still, like, she still openly grieves, and I'm grateful that I'm able to know enough to hold space for her. But I do wish there's more that could be done inside our school district. So I love what you're doing to help inform people on trauma and how to better help people.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you know, you and I, of course, we've talked about this, but it's that idea that all of a sudden I'm going to be better. Like, this is going to go away. And in fact, that's the opposite, right? Is that, you know, 5 years down the line, I'm still going to be without my son, and I'm still going to be learning how to cope with that. And my expectation is that you respect that, but also that you understand that that you can do things that are harmful to me, and that there can be intention around taking better care of folks. And so, and whether that be, again, the school system or the place that you work, you know, I'm real passionate and really thoughtful about how leaders take good care of their staff. That there's a responsibility there that I think we sometimes put aside, or leaders will say, well, I'm not their therapist, I don't have to fix this. And it's not about being their therapist, and it's not about fixing that. It's about being human and about having kindness and compassion and empathy. And really great leaders have great ability to empathize. And so, so that's, you know, certainly what I would hope to help teach and help folks understand, that there's intentional ways you can help people heal.
Yes, yes. I love that. And I would completely agree, because unless you ask, you really have no idea what people are going through behind the scenes. And great leaders ask great questions.
Right. Right. Yeah. And definitely, I mean, my experience was, you know, I worked in a mental health facility where I thought that, I thought everyone should know. And we were integrating trauma-informed practices. Like this was what I thought. But it's really about that people have to sit in their own discomfort to connect with people who are going through any sort of a traumatic situation. And that's really hard. And again, it's not about passing judgment about that. It's about just recognizing there's a responsibility for us to sometimes, as leaders, sit in our discomfort to help people move forward. You know, that's a challenge. I get that. That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of a tangent too.
Huh?
I said that's kind of going on a tangent too, but I'm really that's really my my passion. So.
No, I agree. I agree that a lot of corporations talk about having great culture. But having great culture begins with holding space for your people and helping them transform their lives through trauma, and practicing, you know, kindness is one, but also I think one of your other tips was about grace.
Yeah. So anyone that knows me knows that I talk about giving grace all the time, and that it goes two ways. That we give grace to ourselves, that you know, we honor the process that we're in, and the journey that we're taking, and that that there's not a right or wrong way whenever we're experiencing adversity about how we walk through that. And so so sometimes I think that and for myself, I had to learn to give myself grace, because there's always guilt and shame that comes along and follows with any story, with any trauma story, whether it's mine to have or not. I promise you, I have it. And so I really had to learn to give myself grace, to acknowledge that, you know, I can. And I imagine, I mean, you're a mom too, Tammy, so you know that idea of how we can take our own stuff and put it off on our kids and feel a great deal of shame that's not ours to even carry. And so I really had to practice giving myself grace as I went through this process, but then also giving grace to the people around us, whether that be our family, our coworkers, our friends, like giving grace to that process as well. We always talk about that in this house. There's three of us going through the same story, but in three very different ways. Our journey is very different, and I only know my journey from my side of it. And so, in order for us to be in the same space, we have to learn to give grace to each other when we don't understand a response that someone's having. And that's the same with my colleagues and my coworkers and just the people around us. And again, I can't help but think about this over the last 7 months, that people are having such a wide array of trauma responses right now related to all that our country and our world has experienced in the last 7 months. And giving grace will go a long way in healing some of the wounds that we've been experiencing over the last, since March, which is crazy to think about. But
it is crazy. Yeah. I was texting with my sister-in-law earlier, and she was talking about how, it's the kids struggling a little bit with school, not really struggling, but making the best out of it, but not really engaged. And I said, yeah, hopefully, someday it goes back to, regular, like school gets back, but maybe not back to normal, but back to better, like that there can be more education. And because I think that eyes are opened a little bit more about what children are experiencing at home and at school. And I hope that the teachers and the school districts are aware of some of those struggles and how that is, and that the parents are aware of how hard this is on teachers to educate. It's just, I can see things from both perspectives. And I think that is important in any situation, is that you can step back and not just be triggered by how you feel and what your emotional response is, but okay, can I look at this from this person's perspective without trying to take that away from them, but just by holding space and being open and compassionate to their journey that's different than my journey, but is also equally important, in our environment. Like, everybody is needed. We're all special.
Right. Yeah. And I think too, like if you think about the school situation and right now, what kids have gone through, and one of the, I always try and think about, like, what's on the other side? How are we going to grow through these challenges, and what are we going to take from this? And so, I've heard some really cool stories about kids who have struggled in school for years and years and years, and they went to this virtual world and they excelled. That this was their spot, and this was the way that they were meant to learn, in my mind, right? That they went from struggling to pass classes to straight A's because they did so well. And so those are the lessons I hope we also learn from this, is that everyone's journey is different, and maybe one size fits all for schools are not right. And of course, you and I probably could lecture on about that for hours, but just recognizing that that whatever story a kiddo comes into a schoolroom with impacts their ability to learn in that school. And so how do we find that match for them that's a good fit? And then same with, like you say, the teachers and the parents. I've been doing presentations on COVID and self-care, and I've been doing it over the last 7 months. And as I've listened to stories through this journey from teachers and from parents and from folks in the school district, and just again, if we can just give grace to understand that man, none of us have survived a pandemic before, and so I don't understand your choices, but also you probably don't understand mine, and so let's give grace to this process. So that we can all heal from the kind of collective trauma that we've been experiencing.
Yeah, and that collective energy that's just out. And I think about it when I go to the grocery store, and everybody's all masked up, but it's usually the same little greeter at the door, making sure that you're coming in wearing your mask, and still smiling, because when you smile authentically, it still shows. And like all these sprinkles that I have up here.
That's right.
So, just holding space and being kind in public to people that are maybe implementing rules that maybe they don't agree with, but it's also their job. And I think that that's also important as we go through it. So another one of your tips was practicing gratitude. And that is one of my favorite things to talk about and to do, because when you can find some kind of gratitude for the crazy situations that you experience, and maybe the lesson in what you've learned from it, I think that it goes really deep for your healing.
Yeah, definitely. So, one of the things if you're talking about trauma and healing, of course, you talk about mindfulness and meditation, and I always joke and say, like, I'm terrible at mindfulness and meditation. It's so hard for me to practice those intentional acts around mindfulness and meditation. But one of the things that kept coming back to me over the last few years is, but you can practice gratitude, and that's a form of mindfulness if you do that. And I was like, well, that seems pretty easy to come up with a few things every day that I'm grateful for.
Mm.
Um, but then when I started doing it, I realized it's actually sometimes really hard to do that, especially when you have a traumatic story. And some days are so incredibly difficult. Sometimes it's a challenge to just get out of bed and put on clothes in the morning. And that's 3 years later. And sometimes it's still that big of a challenge. And so one of the things I've really grappled with over the last probably 6 months is that it's okay to practice and be grateful for many things in your life, and also have moments of sadness mixed with moments of joy, and that there's no right or wrong way, even to practice gratitude. Like, I feel like we put pressure on ourselves to do things perfectly, and to heal in a certain way, but it can all be mixed in together, and that's fine. We were talking before we went live about just like our relationship, and how, again, that we connected because I lost my son and you lost your husband, and I wouldn't have had that relationship had I not lost Jake. And of course, I would give you up in a minute, Tammy, to have Jake back. No offense, but
Please, yes.
but in the meantime, though. You are one of many incredible people I have met over the last 3 years. I'm getting chills as I talk about it, because I think Jake sends people to me when I need them, to get me through challenges, and to push me to have these difficult conversations about that we can have incredible loss in our life, and um, we can still have happiness at the same time. And I really, if you would have told me that 3 years ago, I would have said, no, I'm probably not ever going to have an authentic smile again. But it's not true. It's not true. I have many things to be grateful for, and I can have that gratitude and still have a really terrible day. And they go together sometimes.
I think it's important that we don't practice fake positivity.
Yes.
I think that practicing gratitude and practicing fake positivity, because, the whole fake it till you make it thing, I don't think that saying is meant to be in trauma.
Right.
I don't think you can fake it till you make it, because if you don't stop and hold space for yourself and acknowledge that you have experienced trauma, then trauma at one day is going to knock you on your ass.
Yeah. It's going to win.
From experience, when I say that, I tried really hard to just keep going and being here and earning money and doing stuff, until everything at one time just hit me and knocked me on my butt, and like more than once. And I had to really honor that and heal, not in a superficial, hey, I'm going to put positive stuff out there and positive vibes are going to flow to me, but in a fact that that I took time to heal my soul, and I listened to my soul without burying it deep down, because I think that when you're in a trauma response and your brain is, everybody around you is saying, oh, you just need to get over it, or you need to, like my dad said, you need to go find another husband.
Right.
Solve it. And God love him, because that's his advice, that he feels like he's just wanting to support me. But validating somebody's experience and understanding that you're not walking in my shoes and experiencing not only my grief, but working with my kids through their grief. And I think that as a parent, that's kind of one of the hardest things, is acknowledging and healing your own grief while you're trying to help your kids along the way has been definitely one of the hardest things in my journey.
Definitely. Well, I think one of the things that I have really learned too, it's not on my 4 tips, but if I would have said 5, I would have said um, um, finding out how to be authentic after you've experienced trauma is so life-saving, but also so terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
I've really thought about this a lot in the last 3 years, that I never thought about being authentic before. Like I just was, or I thought I was, but I've had to fight for things in a really different way over the last 3 years than I would have ever had um, imagined having to go through. And through that, I feel like I figured out who I'm supposed to be and how I'm supposed to use my voice differently. And so it's like, and I don't know, I mean, Tammy, if you have that experience, but it's like, now I understand what it means to be authentic. Now I understand what it means to be an advocate for myself, to be an advocate for my child who's living and my child who is dead, to be an advocate for my family or for the boys' friends, the boys, I call them the boys, but Jake's friends who have experienced this trauma that no teenager should have to experience around losing their best friend. And the things that you're talking about where people say, well, I mean, they should just be better now, right? It's been 3 years. You should be moving on, and just being able to stand up for that is really different for me, and something that I value. I think it's helped me survive.
Yeah, being able to use your voice, your story to help others, to empower others to also use their voice in their story. And circling that to your fifth tip, finding new purpose. And I know for me, I don't know if it was instant, but I can remember early on feeling like I was no longer in the right career field, because I felt this calling to help people in a different way. And I can remember one of my mentors just saying that, how are you not helping people? You're helping people make the biggest financial decision of their life. And it just no longer felt as impactful because just nobody understood. And when you can have an authentic conversation with somebody around their trauma, and you can hold space and you both leave a little bit better, there's some real power in that.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like, I feel fortunate. I feel fortunate that I was already invested in some of this work, prior to losing Jake. And I feel fortunate that I was able to continue to do the work afterwards. I didn't lose that piece of me. And so I feel like I already had kind of a purpose before I went through that trauma. But I think for all of us, it's figuring out what that purpose is, because there's so many shifts that happen after you experience any kind of trauma. I don't care if it's traumatic loss, which is certainly what our experience is, but after you've experienced something that changes your brain and body, then oftentimes you have to figure out what is your purpose. And it doesn't have to be something as what we do, where we just put it out there and talk about it and try and inspire people to do different and to make changes. It can be as simple as, really, I'm meant to explore my artistic side, and that's what my purpose is, and so I'm going to do that. Or it's gosh, I've always wanted to work with kids, and so I'm going to volunteer my time working with kids in an underserved population, or whatever it is. We all have to define that, and we have to take that moment, because that's really what helps to kind of keep that resilient core strengthened when we experience other adversity.
How do you think that your trauma changed your view on what you knew about trauma?
It changed everything. It changed everything. You know what it really changed was I it has to do with that authentic piece. Really, is that I think that it made me realize that a lot of folks are doing a lot of talk around trauma and a lot of talk around helping people heal, but they're not putting the action to the words.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what really, that's the first thing that it made me change. And that's only because I was doing the work before. You know, I was
So you knew.
I thought I was changing cultures before. The other thing that it really made me think about is unless you've experienced something significantly traumatic, you have no idea what it feels like to go through something traumatic. You know, I've had a lot of losses in my life that, you know, we've talked about this before we lost Jake. My younger son and I, he would say, I don't know anybody who's had so many deaths in one family as ours. And I'm like, I know it is weird, right? But losing Jake was different, and it changed everything. And I think that that's the thing that I've really learned about trauma is trauma really changes everything. And I think that we don't acknowledge that. We don't acknowledge how all encompassing that is. And I'm the same. I didn't know. And I was a social worker working with people who had trauma stories, and I didn't know the depths of injury whenever you experience trauma.
Yeah, and I think that like some of the things that I learned, or maybe I even held on to in the beginning, was that, you know, I can't imagine your loss, right? And then what you do is then I might unconsciously minimize my own loss because I'm empathizing with your loss in a way. And you can't compare losses, you know, trauma and how you're going to react to trauma in your own body. You have to hold your own space and reach out for help. I think is so important, because I was really bad at doing that in the beginning, reaching out and asking for help, because I think that, you know, sometimes people will tell you and then you take it on like, well, there's worse off people than you. That might be, but that doesn't invalidate how I'm feeling. And your brain can't cope with that because it's so confusing.
Right. Well, and I think too, you know, I always say, you know, like to me, my loss is the most unimaginable loss, right? But to you, your loss is the most unimaginable loss. Like there's no, it's really about what it does to our brain and body. Do we have the capacity, the things within us to cope with whatever adversity we experience? And if we don't, then that's a trauma. And I'm the last person that's going to define what your trauma is. If you tell me, man, this is really terrible and it's changing my life, then I'm going to sit down and listen to you, because I believe what your story is. I believe that whatever your experience is has changed you. And I do think that is where we get stuck a lot with how we help people heal and help them go through their process, is we think, well, I mean, everybody loses a parent. Everybody loses, you know, everybody has loss. Everybody, you know, everybody's going through COVID together. But the reality is we're all going through it together, but differently. And so it's not our job to sit in judgment. It's our job to give grace and to be kind to each other.
Yeah, and practice gratitude. And even if your gratitude is, I was able to hold space for somebody today, or, you know, I did get out of bed and have food today is still, but then also not minimizing the days that it's just so heavy that you can't practice gratitude, and don't beat yourself up.
Right. Tomorrow's a new day. Start over.
Yeah.
Start over. You know, and I think for folks who are just listening and thinking like, how can I help somebody who's experienced trauma? You know, one of the things that I've really learned is that it only takes one person giving me space for me to know, to have hope, you know, and for trauma survivors, hope is everything. Without hope, we really won't get out of bed in the morning many days. I mean, really, hope is everything, but it only takes one person to help us to feel hope, to give us that reason. I feel like I'm on some days. And so, you know, I think about like you're sharing your story about the counselor who was so kind initially, whenever your kids went back to school, and how that helped Hunter to be able to be in school. And that's the same thing with Zane, the vice principal at that school. He loved my child unconditionally. He gave my child grace every single day. And without that, I don't think we would be where we were at today had he not had that one caring adult who was consistently in his life. And we grown-ups need that just the same.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. And hopefully that comes from the people that are constants in our life. But if it's not, then reaching out to somebody and finding that, you know, that rock to help you through when you don't feel steady is important, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed chatting with you as always today, and sharing your insight and your unbelievable story. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. Thank you.
Have an amazing day, everybody.